Yep. Anyway, Matthew chapter 14, verse 13. Are you ready for this? Now, when Jesus heard about John, he withdrew from there in a boat to a secluded place by himself. And when the people had heard of this, they followed him on foot from the cities. And when he went ashore, he saw a large crowd and felt compassion for them and healed their sick. When it was evening, the disciples came to him and said, "This place is desolate and the hour is already late. So send the crowds away that they may go into the villages and buy food for themselves." But Jesus said to them, "They do not need to go away. You give them something to eat." And they said to him, "We have here only 5 loaves and 2 fish." And he said, "Bring them here to me." Ordering the people to sit down on the grass, he took the 5 loaves and 2 fish, and looking up toward heaven, he blessed the food. Breaking the loaves, he gave them to the disciples, and the disciples gave them to the crowds. And they all ate and were satisfied. They picked up what was left over of the broken pieces, 12 full baskets. There were about 5,000 men who ate, besides women and children. This story is one of the very few things that are in both the synoptic gospels, Matthew, Mark, and Luke, and the Gospel of John. That kind of sets it apart as, like I say, the synoptic gospels, they cover a lot of the same material, but John seems to have, taken a bit of the thought, the philosophy that, well, those guys covered it, I don't need to. But he also includes this story. So this really gives the impression that it had a deep impact on all the apostles and was significant. And obviously, when you read it, it's one of the most famous stories, and it certainly does make an impression. Now, I want to quickly just say that this is presented as a miracle, and I would like to suggest, if you, like me, have read commentaries or heard someone preach, that it wasn't a miracle, but more of a miracle of heart, where I've read one guy that I really respect. He's a scholar and probably has a great heart for the Lord. It's my impression. But for whatever reason, he says, it wasn't a miracle so much as just a miracle of the heart that all these people in the crowd had food. They just didn't want to share any of the food. But when they saw Jesus sharing the food, they said, I guess I can share food too. And then they all shared the food with one another, and everyone was satisfied. And that's nice. That's really nice. And that is something that the Lord does to us. It makes us less selfish and all that kind of stuff. But that's not how the crowd received it. It's as you read the Gospels, they followed Jesus later for the reason that they could get more food, not because they had food and shared it. They didn't go like, oh, let's follow Jesus because then we can share our food. They followed Jesus because Jesus can make food out of nothing. That's incredible. And the disciples also thought the same thing when they had forgotten to bring food. That was the issue that came up. It was like, oh yeah, but Jesus can make food. Like there was, it was how they understood it. I don't understand how we could get such a strange picture of it. And the other one that I've seen is that Jesus just made tiny, tiny, tiny portions, and everyone got a little bit, and they were happy with it. They were just happy with it, and that was the miracle, that they were happy with a little part. Well, that doesn't explain how they got 12 basketfuls left over. I don't even understand how someone wrote that down and sent that to a publisher and said, here's my commentary on this. I'm like, are you kidding? Did you read this whole story? Like it's strange, but I just want to say this is a miracle. That's the way it is given to us. It's a miracle. And so Jesus has been ministering, and he's been ministering around the Sea of Galilee. He's probably near or in Capernaum on the eastern side of the Sea of Galilee, and he hears news that John has been executed in prison, and it is upsetting, I'm sure. And he says to his disciples, let's go away, just us, and have some time. And so they get into the boat and they start to go across the Sea of Galilee. Now, the Sea of Galilee is just an egg-shaped lake. It's not it's not a wide open sea, and it's not one of those lakes that you can't see around the edges. It's really just egg-shaped. And so when they leave here and start going there, everyone can just see the boat. Like it's, you're on the edge of a lake and there's a guy over there on a boat. So it's not hard to guess where they're going. And the people seem to be legitimately hungry for Jesus, spiritually, because they leave to catch up with Jesus without packing food. And that kind of says something. They leave and go, I think Jesus is going over there to that side. Let's just keep going and see if we can catch Jesus without regard to whether they're going to have food or not. And maybe along the way, maybe they pick up more people. Maybe they tell people as they pass, because there are plenty of towns and villages on your way, going, because they ended up on just the northeastern top of the Sea of Galilee. And so there's plenty of little towns along the way that they may have passed as they go on this walk. And may have picked up people. Anyway, they end up with, what probably amounts to 10,000 or more people out in the middle of nowhere. It's desolate, is how the disciples describe it. It's an empty space. And Jesus, when he gets there in the boat, I mean, here's they're coming in shore, and there's already a crowd of people and more people coming. And, it's like, okay, but our inclination was probably be like, turn the boat around, guys. Like you're coming ashore, you see it happening, and you go, that's not what I'm planning for. This was a weekend off. This was this was supposed to be some time alone. And it'd be easy to just go, turn it around, guys, turn it around. But Jesus lands the boat, because as clear as it is, like I say, easy enough for them to see Jesus in the boat, at least by the time Jesus is getting to near the shore, it's easy enough to see a crowd of several thousand people gathering, and so he lands the boat anyway, because he has compassion for them, because they are, and it's easy to imagine seeing the people from a distance just scurrying to get to where Jesus is in this big crowd of people, and him saying they're like sheep without a shepherd, that they're just running around looking for someone to help them. And so he has compassion for them. And so when he sees them, he pulls up anyway, and he gets out of the boat and he comes to them. And there's some that are sick and some that have come needing, and he's praying for them and healing them, and he's preaching to them, and he's spending time with them. And as the day goes on and it gets towards evening, the disciples say, Jesus, you got to send these people away. It's getting late, and there's nowhere to eat around here, so we got to send them somewhere else where they can find food. And Jesus, the Gospels, as you read the story, through the different Gospels, the Gospels tell us that Jesus knew what he was going to do, but he asked them this question anyway. He asked them to provoke some faith in them, that they would be active in this, that they would participate. So he says to them, you don't have to send them away. You give them something to eat. And Matthew's account says, and they just say to him, we have here only 5 loaves and 2 fish. And from the other accounts, it becomes clear that there was a boy there. He's the one who's literally carrying the loaves and the fish, right? So it was his loaves and fish. But the way it's presented gives the impression to me that the boy had the boy was included in the we have 5 loaves and 2 fish, because my impression is that at some point Jesus said to his disciples, do not hinder the children from coming to me. And I suspect that it might have been at one point that, the guys would be like, hey, kids, get lost. The guys are up here. We're adults over here, man. Leave the adults alone. But Jesus had created a situation where this boy could be standing right nearby, and he clearly, from the other Gospels, hears Jesus say, give them something to eat, and he's the one who steps up and is the only guy who has enough sense to have some bread and fish with him. And so he says, hey, I've got this. And the disciples, like, it's not like he's, just some kid completely out of nowhere. He seems to be included in the we have 5 loaves and 2 fish. I like to imagine, anyway, that he was not obviously part of the 12, but he was part of the group, at least on this day. Like, he was in there. He was up front with everybody else. And he was listening to Jesus, and he was participating, and even doing a little better than the disciples. And I think it's teaching them a lesson, and us too, right? But anyway, he had offered up his 5 loaves and 2 fish. The loaves, a loaf of bread is, a round lump of bread that is portioned for a family at a meal. And so if you have a loaf of bread, that's for a family. If you have 5 loaves of bread, that's for 5 families. And the Gospels tell us that it was barley bread. Today, barley bread is probably more expensive because it's so organic and so natural and all that kind of stuff. But back in the day, barley bread was the poor person's bread. And so they had 5 loaves of, low dollar bread, and they had 2 fish. And again, the language of the Gospels makes it clear that it's a small fish, most likely a small smoked fish, like a small mackerel or something. Not a big, don't imagine it's a big fish. These are small fish. I don't want to call them pocket fish because they didn't have pockets, but they're kind of, like they were a lunch snack fish, and they weren't not so much meal, but this is what they have, and they bring it to Jesus. Jesus says, they tell him what they have, and Jesus says, bring them here to me. And they order the people to sit down. The Gospels tell us that they sat down in groups of 50 and 100. I imagine the reason for that was to make it easier to serve people. If you were at a music festival or something, and there's a crowd of 5,000 people standing in one open field, and imagine yourself trying to hand out anything and know if you covered this area or that. You're like, I'm handing this out, I'm handing that out. Did I get these people? I don't know. They were going back over here and then over there, and then who got stuff, who doesn't? It would be really, really difficult to manage a group of 5,000 to 15,000 people without some kind of organization. So a very simple ways, they said, you get together in groups of 50 or 100, and then that way, Andrew can go to a group of 50 and feed this group, everybody covered, and then check that off and move over to this group. And it's logistics, simple logistics in religion. Here we are. It just makes it simpler to make this process happen. Also makes it easier for the estimate of how many people were there, but I don't think that's why they did it that way, but certainly it gives makes it a little easier in that way. It's most likely that the men and women sat separately, which is why they say there was 5,000 men, because in the synagogue, men and women sat separately. And so it's very likely that when Jesus starts to preach, they would kind of take on that mentality and say, oh, okay, women over there, men over here, and they probably sat like that. And so, whenever it came to making these kind of estimates back in the day, it was simple enough to say that there was 5,000 men. You can do the guessing as to how many women and children there would be. I mean, it's all estimates anyway, so it's not a big deal, but it's certainly simpler to, guess this many people than to actually get a count of all the people. So anyway, they have them sit down. Jesus takes the bread and the fish, and he looks up to heaven. He gives thanks. He blesses the bread, the fish, and then he breaks the bread and the fish and puts the portions in each of the baskets. I imagine that each of the disciples got a basket. It says that there were 12 basketfuls that came back from leftovers. So I imagine that each of the 12 disciples had a basket, and Jesus put some portion of bread and some portion of fish in each one. I don't know if he filled each basket with broken pieces of this loaf, or if he, filled it with fish or what have you. I don't know how that happened. If he just put one piece in and one piece of fish and sent them out. And then they were like, I don't know. Oops, hey, there's no one. Oop, oh, there's no one. Oh, there's no one. And it just kept going on and on. I don't know. The Gospels do not try to explain miracles, it happened, and that's just the way it is. Sometimes it's best to leave it that way. But they went out and they handed out food to everyone, and everyone was satisfied. Everyone ate, was satisfied, and even had more than enough. Came back with 12 baskets full of leftovers. That's pretty awesome. Now, this message, or the story gives a very clear message that we don't have to have everything. We just need God's blessing. And we don't have to, whatever the, the loaf is, whatever the fish is in our lives, God can supply our needs if we come to him with it, if we give it to him. And I want to make clear that it's not simply an issue of getting his blessing, but I think it's very important to recognize that the bread wasn't just blessed, but it was broken. And the fish wasn't just blessed, it was broken. And that if they had walked out with 5 loaves, a loaf would feed a family, and 5 families would have been blessed. And 5 families would have had a loaf of bread. But because it was broken, that opened up the possibilities of what you could do with it. I want us to recognize that we can't think that we could just bring to Jesus whatever issue we have in our life and just say, God bless this, without the possibility that we need to be broken. That I say broken, I mean, sometimes that's we know exactly what that means. Other times it's not as dramatic. But there's a humility that we need. It was required. Acknowledging before the Lord that we can't do this. And I'd say it's a danger more to mature Christians than it is to new Christians. And those of us who have been in the Lord for a long time, it's both good and bad that we've gotten good at some things. And, we can do certain things all right. But if we think we have a gift, let's say, I have a gift. You see this, you see this in, you can see this a lot in preachers. When you first start to preach, it's really hard. It's hard, weird, awkward, difficult. And as the Lord continues to grow you and bless you, it gets easier and easier. And the gift grows and develops, and it's you see preachers who can preach really well, and then you find out that in their real life, they're going completely sideways. And you're like, how is it that they're going all sideways, but they got such a gift? And it's like, well, it's because they've stopped depending on the Lord. Like Samson, like, got a great gift and all, but are you listening to the Lord at all? Like, what's going on in your life? There's a brokenness, a humility, that even when you're gifted as a Christian, it's required that you come and say, Jesus, I can't do this. I mean, on one level, yeah, I could do this any day. I could do this. I feel like I could do this all the time, any day. But I want to be clear, I can't do this, not for a second, without you. Like, I can't do this. Like, it is grace that we depend on, and not our own strength. So, that's right. Like Samson. Like Samson has this gift from God, and man, he's just rolling through his life in a completely goofed up manner, but still gifted. And but it's not until he's broken and he finally finds that place of humility before God that his gift is really blessed, and he finds the real potential in himself. And so, whether it be a gift that we have, or whatever, in our struggles with sin and what have you, like, again, when you first come to the Lord, you're all kinds of broken up and go like, oh, Jesus, help me get through this day, and then, as you grow, and it's real growth and it's spiritual growth, you grow to a place where you're like not struggling with these things anymore, and you can forget, in a sense, that it's only grace, it's not you, and we lose that humility before the Lord and humility before each other. We can manage to look at another person and say, I could never do that. I could never do that. That's, but you could. So the grace of God was drawn back from you. We just fall back to dust. And we can't think. I mean, and it's not like we think it consciously, but we can get away from it. I had just written just last week, I wrote a little article for the newsletter, which plug for the newsletter, and in it, I recount a little story about when I was a teenager before I knew Jesus, and just I was just I had a real anger, kind of inside of me that, was kind of thing that, a little story in there. I talk about, getting in a fight with a guy for no reason. Like, I have no reason to be involved with this guy at all. But I was, this kind of place in my life where, I could be obviously judgmental and angry and whatever. And anyway, and I wrote that and I thought, I'm not that person anymore. I'm just not, I could never do that. And then 2 days later, I'm like so bent at some guy, and I'm like, oh man, and nothing like, what I was before, but I speak poorly to the fellow. I'm not cussing anybody or anything like that. I just know that not even the words that I said, but just the way I said it just wasn't right. But it was enough for me to look back and go, I'm sorry, Jesus. Maybe I was a little too full of myself, maybe a little too puffed up. It's not that I'm not who I was. I've been born again. But everything I am, every good thing that I am is in Jesus. And I better never forget that. And I need to maintain that brokenness because it allows me to have grace for other people. It also puts me in the right place to serve because I don't want to serve in my own strength or in my own wisdom. Like, you do something enough and you say like, with the first time you're asked to do a certain thing and you're just praying day and night trying to figure out how to do a certain thing. And then the next time you're still praying and praying and, but years go on and you're asked to do a certain thing and you just go, yeah, I got that. No problem. Right. And it's like, yeah, I got this. But like, if we want to really be blessed, we need to maintain the humility and the brokenness of saying, Lord, I can't do this. I mean, I could try to do this the same way I've done it a million times, but I don't want that. I need you. I need your blessing, and please don't let me do this in my own strength. Don't let me do this with my own wisdom or my own gift. Like, let me do this with you. And as I see that, I see that in this bread and loaf. It's not that the loaf wouldn't be a blessing and a fish wouldn't be a blessing. You bring your natural loaf and it's a blessing because you've given it. That's awesome. But the broken one, well, that becomes supernatural. And the Lord can do anything he wants with that. And so even in the places where we're gifted and even where we're matured and grown, like it still requires us to be humble and broken. In 2 Corinthians chapter 12, verse 7, 2 Corinthians 12:7, Paul says, because of the surpassing greatness of the revelations, for this reason, to keep me from exalting myself, there was given me a thorn in the flesh, a messenger of Satan to torment me, to keep me from exalting myself. Concerning this, I implored the Lord 3 times that it might leave me. And he said to me, my grace is sufficient for you, for power is perfected in weakness. Most gladly, therefore, I will rather boast about my weakness so that the power of Christ may dwell in me. Therefore, I am well content with weaknesses, with insults, with distresses, with persecutions, with difficulties, for Christ's sake. For when I am weak, then I am strong. And even if we just go back to Matthew chapter 5 and the Beatitudes, I mean, you can summarize 3/4 of the Beatitudes with blessed are the broken. Blessed are the poor, the mournful, the meek, the persecuted, the insulted. Like, that's the hungry. That's who we're talking about. And if you don't count yourself as hungry, well, then you miss out on a little bit of blessing. If you don't count yourself as poor, you're missing out on a blessing. It's a gift in itself to recognize our brokenness and our need for him. Even those of us who are mature and have figured so much of this stuff out and doing all right and we're doing just great, please let us maintain this humility before the Lord. And so that we don't serve in our own strength, so that we don't just bring this much of a blessing to the next person. it's a blessing if you serve in your strength, because you've been made into something special. The Lord has done something in you. And so if you bring that just the way it is, then it's a blessing. But if you remain humble and broken before him, then he will continue to multiply the effectiveness of that gift. And that's what we desire. And we want to continue to grow in that, right? Hallelujah. Lord, I thank you that you have given us grace, not just to save, but to continue to transform us. Lord God, that you're not done with us, and although we have gone so far and we've changed so much, Lord, you're still not done with us. Help us not to be done with the process. Help us to remain humble and broken before you. Help us to allow you to change us, to mold us, to use us, Lord. Bless us, Jesus. Hallelujah.